Take a walk to any of your local shops in Australia today and you'll see the usual suspects. A bakery, a chemist warehouse, maybe a trendy cafe charging $12 for smashed avo. But then you'll see the local tobacconist. Tobacconist? A shop like this shouldn't exist. Australia has some of the most restrictive laws on the planet and some of the most aggressive health campaigns ever conceived. More importantly, a legal packet of Winnie regular cigarettes now costs about $40. $40. For a habit that used to cost a $5, that price point should have eradicated smoking. But if you actually stand on the corner and watch, you'll notice something weird. These shops aren't dying, they're absolutely humming. There's a constant stream of tradies, office workers, and students ducking in and out, and they aren't all walking out with a $40 pack of Winnies. The Australian government is currently presiding over a violent, multi-billion-dollar shadow economy that it accidentally built with its own hands. While they stand at the podium in Canberra telling us these taxes are for the greater good, the reality is that they've hit a wall. In economics, that wall is called the Laffer curve, where high taxes have a similar effect on tax revenue to low taxes. In the last 5 years, tobacco tax revenue has collapsed from over $16 billion down to an expected $7 billion. That's an almost $10 billion hole in the federal budget. If that were because Aussies actually quit smoking, it would be a public health miracle. But we all know that's not what's happened. What actually happened is that the nanny state treated grown adults like naughty children, squeezed the lemon until it was bone dry, and then acted surprised when the juice sprayed back in their faces. By making legal smokes the most expensive in the world, the government basically handed the entire industry over to organised crime. For a long time, Australia actually led the world in discouraging smoking. In the 80s and 90s, we banned the ads. In 2012, the Gillard government brought in plain packaging. Former Health Minister Nicola Roxon said in an interview with Channel 10, "We're going to be the first country from around the world to introduce it." The point of having plain packaging is to make sure we get rid of the last way tobacco companies advertise their product.
Well, the point of having plain packaging is to make sure that we get rid of the last way that tobacco companies can advertise and promote their products, particularly to new smokers. And they use colour, they use logos, they use gold embossing to pretend that these are attractive and safe products. There isn't any safe amount of tobacco that you can smoke. It will kill you eventually, and we obviously want to make sure that that message is heard loud and clear.
But then the vibe shifted. The government realised that smokers were a captive audience. They were a reliable, ever-growing cash cow. The Rudd government kicked things off with a massive 25% excise hike, and then both sides of politics, Labor and the Coalition, signed up for a bipartisan tax escalator. For years, it was the ultimate win-win for Canberra. They could jack up the price by 12.5% every single year, fill the budget holes, and whenever anyone complained, they could just wrap themselves in the flag of public health. It was the perfect political shield, and they assumed that because smoking was bad, there was no limit to how much they could charge. By the mid-2010s, the tax had basically tripled. They were trying to bankrupt people into being healthy, but this is where the famous Aussie skepticism comes in. People started seeing the government as an extortionist. The government's arrogance blinded them to a simple fact of human nature. If you create a massive price gap between what a product costs to make and what you charge for it, someone is going to fill that gap. And in Australia, that someone turned out to be the most violent criminal syndicates we've seen in decades. So let's look at the machine that's actually running the shop now. Successful criminal enterprises are just really efficient responses to broken markets. The business logic is terrifyingly simple. Right now, a single cigarette carries about $1.40 in government tax. Now, do the math. A standard shipping container holds about 10 million cigarettes. If you're an enterprising criminal, the arbitrage is obvious. You buy the product for pennies from the same overseas factories as the legal giants, but you forget to pay the $14 million in tax. This allows you to sell a pack for $15, undercutting the legal market by 70%, while still making a higher profit margin than the legitimate players could ever dream of. The margins on illegal tobacco now rival those of high-grade narcotics, while at the same time being way lower risk. If you get caught with a container of Coke, for example, you're looking at life. If you get caught with a container of cigarettes, you might get a fine or a few years in a minimum security farm. High-level criminal operators looked at this and realized that tobacco is a Goldilocks commodity. Massive profit, low risk, and a huge, desperate customer base created by the government's own pricing. The collapse in revenue tells the whole story. The government's addiction to tobacco money is failing because smokers have simply migrated to a market where a pack costs $15 instead of $50. The Australian Bureau of Statistics actually admitted recently that their data is becoming useless because legal sales have plunged so fast, down nearly 30% in a single year. There's even been reports that the state is now literally snooping through the sewers, analysing wastewater and sewer data just to figure out how much nicotine we're actually using. And the illicit market has far more complexity than what you'd think. It's a 3-tiered machine. First, you've got Chop Chop, loose tobacco grown on illegal farms in rural Australia, sometimes the size of 12 footy fields. Then you've got the illicit brands, legitimate cigarettes from Asia or the Middle East that aren't registered here, and finally, you've got the counterfeits, fakes designed to look like our plain packaged legal smokes, but filled with unregulated, hazardous floor sweepings. By trying to squeeze every last cent out of the naughty Australian population, the government incentivized the average middle-class Aussie to seek out these illicit cigarettes from dubious sources. Now, every documentary needs a villain, and in this story, we have plenty. But the real conflict is actually between the syndicates themselves over who gets to collect the criminal excise. You've probably seen the headlines about the Melbourne Tobacco War. It's been a brutal conflict that's turned our suburbs into battlegrounds. The crazy part is that we can trace the current explosion of violence back to a single failed meeting in March 2023. A group of underworld bureaucrats, including members of the Mongols, the rebels, and prominent crime families, met to try and form a commission. They basically wanted to be the criminal version of the ACCC. Their goal was to control the price of illegal tobacco and divide up the map so that everyone could profit from the government's high taxes in peace. But someone offshore refused to play ball, and eventually the whole thing fell apart. What followed was a tactic known as earn or burn. If you own a tobacco shop, you'd sell the syndicate's illegal product as well as pay them protection money, usually around $1,000 a week, or your business is torched. Since early 2023, we've seen over 200 firebombings nationwide. In Victoria alone, more than 125 shops have been hit. The irony is staggering. While politicians in Canberra are debating whether to index the tax for the next 6 months, the gangs have already legislated their own market through fire and lead. They've built a resilient franchise system that's effectively replaced the state in some areas. Detectives recently discovered over 800 tobacco shops in Victoria, many of which were either owned by or paying rent to serious organised crime. The government was so focused on being a nanny to smokers that they completely missed the wolves in the schoolyard. They didn't even have a licensing system for these shops. You need a license to sell a lottery ticket or a 6-pack of VB, but for years, anyone could open a tobacconist and start laundering cash. One of the most unsettling parts of this deep dive is the realization that the syndicates have infiltrated the very systems meant to protect us. Smuggling today is about trusted insiders. Criminals are actively recruiting and coercing people inside the Australian Border Force, transport companies, and freight firms. These are the people who have access to the shipping data and can delete a container from the system before anyone even looks at it. Take Operation Yavin 25 as an example. The ABF and New South Wales Police found a syndicate operating right inside an Australian logistics company. When you consider that the ABF only screens about 5% of containers, a few corrupt insiders can turn our border into a literal sieve. The syndicate is suspected of infiltrating Australia's supply chain by exploiting key members of freight forwarding and logistics companies to assist with the importation and distribution of illegal products throughout the Australian community. And once the product lands, the money has to be cleaned. Their launder method of choice is something called the black market peso exchange, which is a term made famous by Mexican drug cartels who use the same method to clean their ill-gotten gains. Billions of dollars of illicit cash is used to buy legitimate goods, like John Deere tractors or electronics, which are then shipped overseas and sold for clean money. The government's response? Throwing another $350 million at enforcement, of course. But as Rohan Pike, founder of a now defunct tobacco strike team within the ABF, summarizes, Commonwealth policies to encourage smokers to quit by increasing excise rates are undermined. Organised crime groups can profit in a risk-free environment. Smokers are exposed to substandard tobacco products, and the Commonwealth's revenue is reduced. It's easy to look at these stats and think, well, I don't smoke, so why should I care? But the tobacco war has a human toll that goes way beyond a ruined pair of lungs. We're talking about people like 27-year-old Katie Tangi, who died in a house fire in Melbourne's West because arsonists targeted the wrong home. That's the reality of a lawless environment. Innocent people getting killed because criminal disputes are settled with petrol bombs in residential streets. Think about the small business owners too. There was a case of a guy named Jim Gregory who ran a second-hand bookstore in Pakenham. His shop was reduced to ash because it was next door to a targeted tobacconist. He lost rare books and a lifetime of work for a conflict he had nothing to do with. This is the comeuppance the nanny state has brought to our doorstep. And let's quickly talk about the greater good argument. The government says these taxes are saving our kids, but the data says the opposite. While adult smoking is down, the combined smoking and vaping rate for 18 to 24-year-olds has surged to nearly 28%. The black market has made nicotine more available and more affordable for young people than the legal market ever was. When you can buy a pack for $12 with no health warnings and no ID check, the government's entire decade of health campaigns is basically bypassed. Worst of all, the illicit market is now playing with fire.
It's 500 times more potent than heroin. And tonight, the killer drug nitazene has made its way into vapes and sold on our streets.
Nitazenes are synthetic opioids reportedly stronger than fentanyl. This is the endgame of Prohibition Light. By forcing them underground, the government has ensured almost all of the market is controlled by the same people who firebomb our streets. They've traded a managed health risk for a lethal, unregulated epidemic. If you look at our peers, it becomes clear that Australia is the global outlier. The UK and New Zealand both have tobacco taxes, but neither of them push the excise to these astronomical, reality-defying levels. Even in far left California, the tax on a pack is about 20% of what we pay here. We are no longer a world leader in health anymore. We're more a world leader in policy failure. Experts predict that by 2026, 80% of all cigarettes sold in Australia will be illegal. That means the legal market, the one the government can actually regulate and tax, will have basically ceased to exist. The lucky country has finally run out of luck in its war on nicotine. We're left with a massive budget deficit, a violent underworld running the suburbs, and a health crisis among our youth that's more dangerous than it was 10 years ago. The solution is a radical dose of humility. The government has to accept that they can't treat adult citizens like children without consequences. They have to accept that the laws of economics apply even to things they don't like. Until we move toward a harm reduction model, one that makes legal tobacco competitive again and provides easy access to regulated, safer alternatives, the smoke from the firebombings will keep rising. The real comeuppance here is that the government has been outsmarted by the very people it sought to control. They thought they could squeeze more juice out of us for revenue, but they forgot that human beings are resourceful and don't like being extorted by their own state. The gangsters didn't infiltrate our society. They were invited in by a government that made crime the only affordable option for millions of citizens. But what do you think? Is it time for the government to admit defeat and slash the tobacco excise to kill the black market? Or do we just keep doubling down on the nanny state regardless of how many shops get torched? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know if you're as fed up with this incompetence as I am. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the systems shaping our lives, hit subscribe and ring the bell. As always guys, thank you for watching and stay curious.